back to a new video. Today we're going to be going through all the books that I read in the month of October. So we have 7 here in total, and there's kind of a range, kind of not at the same time. It's like mainly romance and fantasy, but like a bit of a range within those sorts of genres. We're just going to dive straight into today's video, go through all my ratings and my thoughts and everything. So the first book that I read in October was A Court of Frost and Starlight, which is the 4th book in the ACOTAR series. This one is just a short novella that kind of gives more of an insight into the characters from a few different perspectives rather than just Feyre's perspective, which we've had throughout most of the series. I ended up giving this one 3.25 stars. There wasn't much plot to the actual story. It was more, again, like I said, just focused on the characters and just how they're dealing with stuff after the events that happened in the 3rd book. So I don't want to obviously say like the events and stuff that happened because it's the 3rd one in the series, so I don't want to ruin it for anyone. But yeah, so basically this just focuses on the characters and how they're feeling after the events that happened within the 3rd book. It's only a short one, it's just over 200 pages, so it just gives more of an insight into each of the characters and just their day-to-day lives and that sort of thing, but it's based around them celebrating winter solstice. I feel like it's kind of building up and dropping some hints for the last book, which I haven't read yet but I'm planning to read in November. I did actually really enjoy the story and getting more insight into some of the other characters rather than just focusing on Feyre and Rhys. Although, trust me, Feyre and Rhys are my absolute ride or dies. I adore those two. But yeah, it was nice to get an insight into like Nesta and Elaine and Moore and Cassian and Azriel. I think it was just nice to have a bit more of an insight into the side characters, to be honest, that we don't focus on too much in the other books. Obviously they are still a big part of the books, but this one was more focused on the side characters. But yeah, so 3.25 stars. I know a lot of people say this is not really necessary for the series, and it isn't in particular because there's nothing dramatic that happens within this book, but I feel like it's kind of a nice palette cleanser one between A Court of Wings and Ruin and A Court of Silver Flames, because they are both huge books. The next book that I read was Keeping 13, the 2nd book in the Boys of Tommen series. Ended up giving this one a solid 4 stars. I didn't actually enjoy this one as much as the 1st book in the series. I just feel like some of the actual plot line was a little bit slower throughout this one compared to the 1st one, but I still really enjoyed the book overall, and just the family aspect, it's just my favourite thing. I just love it in all books, to be fair, but this one is just, yeah, I love their friendship group, especially Gibbsy and Claire. I can't wait to read Gibbsy and Claire's story. But just overall the family aspect and just how all the characters are kind of looking out for each other. Again, I don't want to say too much because of it being a follow-on from the 1st book in the series. But yeah, really adore Johnny and Shannon, and we'll definitely be continuing this series. I know these are like huge books. To be honest, the 1st one I didn't really feel, I know it's 800 pages, but it didn't feel like 800 pages. It felt very bingeable, whereas this one did drag on slightly towards the end, or like the middle to end section. I just felt like some of it was a little bit slower paced and kind of not really much happening in the plot, and we were just dragging out a couple of scenes that probably could have been a lot shorter. But overall, like I say, I still really enjoyed the story and ended up giving it 4 stars in the end. And I just really like the whole series in general, and obviously we had a little bit towards the end about Joey leading on to his story, so I'm excited to get to his story with Aoife and see kind of what happens with them too, because they're obviously in and out of the first 2 books, but you don't focus on them too much. You don't really get much of an insight into their relationship or anything like that, so very excited to continue the series. But this one was 4 stars overall. The next book I read was A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. So I actually read this, Keeping 13, and the next book as part of a Reading Sad Romances for a Week reading vlog. So if you want to watch that, that is up on my channel. I'm not gonna lie, this was not my favourite book, and I know that everybody's raves about this and it's a big part in everyone's reading journey, but yeah, it just wasn't for me. I don't think, I didn't really connect to the characters that much. I only really gave it a 3 star, but it might have actually been a little bit less. I feel like the ending, the fact that it was more of a shock factor, is probably what pushed it to 3 stars, but in all honesty it probably could have been like a 2.5, 2.75. I just really did not connect to the story. I think I spoke about this in the reading vlog, but I said that if I'd have read this book earlier on in my reading journey, I probably would have felt differently about it, just because of the writing style and just the way some of the characters acted and things like that, it just felt a little bit more, I don't know what the word is, but basically now that I read like literary fiction and fantasy reads and stuff that really gets your brain ticking and thinking, I think that books like this now just don't work for me. I just feel like I look for something that's a little bit more, I literally cannot think of the word to describe it, but I do feel that if I'd have read this earlier on in my reading journey, then I probably would have enjoyed it more. And just think I probably read it too late on now, because I prefer more, like I said, literary fiction or thriller books or fantasy stuff that I have to really think about while reading and try and like work stuff out, whereas this one just wasn't really for me. I am glad I read it, and I do want to read the next one to understand what's happened with the characters, but I probably am just going to read it on my Kindle rather than actually purchasing the book itself. But yeah, I ended up giving this one, I did at the time give it 3 stars, but I think it's probably more like 2.75ish. The next book I read was If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan, and again this was part of my Reading Sad Romances vlog, and this one had been so highly anticipated and been on my TBR for a very, very long time, or just on my radar in general. Again, this is a really popular book in a lot of people's reading journey. It's just a notorious sad book in general. Ended up giving this one 4.25 stars. When I first started it, I was like, I'm really not sure if I'm going to like this book, just because of the writing style. It felt very choppy. It was like, he did this and then we did that and then this happened and da 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 da, rather than like descriptive writing. However, when I got a bit further into the story, I was like, actually this is making the story go really, really quick, and it's just making sense for this story. I don't know why, but just the perspective it was in and stuff, it just ended up making sense. Normally I wouldn't like that type of writing, but it did make a lot of sense for this, and it did make the book go really, really fast. I think I finished it in like 2 days, something like that. So yeah, I did end up welling up at the end, but I didn't cry but I did end up welling up at the end. I think it is a very, very sad story, especially at the end. I'm very intrigued to read the next one, so I have actually bought that one recently because I want to get to that one in the next month. Considering the ending and the fact that the next one is now in Finney's point of view, it's very intriguing and I want to know what has happened. But I think the fact that the sad part of the book was literally like the last 10 pages ish, I don't quote me on actual figures, but 10 pages, and I was like, it was literally like, this sad thing has happened and it's done. So I feel like I really understand why people cry, because it is definitely something very, very sad, but I was like, oh my god, I was expecting like at least the last like 20% ish to be about it, but it was just like over like that. That's probably why it's not a 5-star for me, but I did enjoy the rest of the book, and again I am really intrigued to actually read the next one and see kind of how it's in Finney's point of view, what it is about, sort of thing, because apparently it's like after the fact of what's happened in this book, so I'm very intrigued to know what's going on. But yeah, end up giving this 4.25 stars, and I definitely recommend this. I can understand why it is such a big thing in people's reading journeys. The next book that I read in October was The Wedding Witch by Erin Sterling, which has actually just been released and was kindly sent to me by Headline Eternal, so thank you so much to them for sending me this book. I would have probably purchased this book anyway, because it is a follow-on from The X-Hex and The Kiss Curse, which I've read both of those books and really enjoyed them. They are the perfect spooky season read, and this one did not disappoint. I also ended up giving this one 4.25 stars. I just really enjoyed it. It's not a long book, it's very short, very bingeable. It's about Bowen, who is the brother to the male main characters from the last 2 books. So each book is about a different brother in their sibling groups. I think Bowen is the last brother as far as I can remember. Bowen is a witch. He's part of like a powerful witch family, and are males still called witches? I think. She has no magical powers whatsoever, but she does acquire magical items, obviously for a cost considering it's her job. So they kind of strike up a deal where she'll only get magical items for him for a secret project that he's working on. Yeah, and they both basically end up at the same wedding. It's kind of like, what are you doing here? You didn't tell me you were coming here. And then there's some magical goings on at this wedding, and they both have to work together to kind of find out what is going on, and there's a bit of a time travel mishap, so they have to kind of work together as well on that issue. And yeah, it's basically just everything you would need for a spooky season read. I really enjoyed the story. Like I say, it was just so bingeable, just went really fast, and I loved Bowen and Tamsin just in general, and I've just loved the whole series, to be honest. If you're looking for a spooky season series, I highly recommend. And I know that this is I think it's their last brother in their sibling group, but I just want Erin Sterling to continuously write witch romances because I love them and she's just so good at it. Then the next book that I read was quite highly anticipated for me, and I think for a lot of people this year, and that is Leather and Lark, which is the second one to Butcher and Blackbird. It's in that same interconnected series. You don't necessarily have to read Butcher and Blackbird. There are some hints to it in this. I feel like you might not understand certain things, but you don't necessarily have to read that one to read this. This one follows Lachlan and Lark. So Lachlan is Rowan, who is our main character in Butcher and Blackbird. It's his brother. And Lark is Sloane, who's our female main character in Butcher and Blackbird. It's her best friend. So Lachlan and Lark basically have a bump in at the start of the book. They don't really know that it is each other during this situation, and then Sloane and Rowan throw a party, and Lachlan and Lark then meet each other, obviously for the first time in person, where they know it's each other, and they kind of are just like, oh, it's you, and they don't really like each other. They then kind of have to strike up a deal to help Lachlan out from a work perspective. So he's a contract killer and Sloane is a secret serial killer. So they kind of strike up a deal where she helps out Lachlan because he has lost one of his biggest contracts for contract killing to this situation that happened between them when they didn't realise it was each other, so at the start of the book. So yeah, they basically strike up a deal and it's a marriage of convenience, and yeah, that's basically what the book is about. So I didn't enjoy this as much as Butcher and Blackbird, which I think was the consensus for a lot of people, to be honest. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but I think it's because there's less murder action in here. Butcher and Blackbird was quite intriguing and a funny comedic story. There was a lot of comedic relief to the fact that they were both serial killers, whereas there wasn't as much comedic relief in this, and I think that's probably what's lacking, and I think that's what people were expecting and then didn't get. I still ended up giving this 4 stars, so I still very much enjoyed the story, really enjoyed Lachlan and Lark's relationship. Although it was a marriage of convenience, you could really see that Lachlan was trying to make it a marriage that Lark wanted to be in and not was forced to be in. So yeah, you could really see that they did actually care for each other, which is ridiculous saying when it's like a romance about 2 killers. But yeah, still very much enjoyed it, and I will be reading the next one in the series, which I think might come out next year. I don't think it comes out this year, I'm not sure. But yeah, still very much enjoyed, and I still do recommend this, but don't go into this thinking that it's going to be exactly the same as Butcher and Blackbird, because it really isn't. I think, like I say, that comedic relief to the serial killer aspect of the book is probably lacking in this one. The last book that I read in October was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Bear with me while I try and explain this story. So it's a gothic fantasy set in a town where they have a mist, and if anyone goes into the mist, then they basically get infected. People who get infected basically are given a magical gift. Essentially, it's not really a gift, because although they have the ability to do one specific magic thing, so each infected person has a different magical ability, so no one has the same kind of magical ability. It could literally be anything. Although they then have the ability to do magic, it also causes them to become ill, and they get worse and worse and worse, and eventually it kind of just takes over them. If anybody is found out to be infected, the king puts them in the dungeons, and essentially they are killed for being infected. So our main character Elspeth, she has an infection, which you know from the very start of the book, but obviously she has to keep it to herself. No one is to know about it, otherwise she'll be sent to the dungeon. It's basically treason to have an infection and not declare it, but also if you know about an infected person and not declare it, then that is also treason in the town. The story then follows Elspeth, and she is helping out to find these playing cards that they have within the town. So there's a deck of cards. I think they said there's like 70 something altogether, but there's 12 different types. So One is like really rare and there's only one version of that card, whereas some of the other ones have multiple versions of it and aren't as rare. So people know about these cards. It's common knowledge that people have them. They're kind of delegated throughout the town. Certain people have certain cards, and basically if you reunite one of each of the cards rather than like the whole deck, and then they can cure the infection. So they're kind of going on, it's almost like a heist mission-y style fantasy where they're now trying to find these cards to cure the infection. But you kind of see some of the characters degrade throughout the story because of their abilities taking a toll on them, and it's just so interesting. It was left on a cliffhanger, so I'm so excited to get to the next one. I will be purchasing straight away because now I kind of have the magical system in my head. I don't want to lose the knowledge of that and then have to work on understanding that again when reading the next one. But yeah, I want to get the next one like straight away. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5 for me, but the ending was just, some of the stuff that happened at the end was just so crazy that I just can't wait to read the next one. And I feel like maybe that one might be a 5 stars now that we have kind of the world built and the magical system understood. I feel like when you have a fantasy book in a series or a duology or a trilogy or whatever, I feel like the first book is very rarely a 5 star because it's kind of world building and stuff like that. That takes a lot of the book. And then I feel like the next ones are normally 5 stars because it just, yeah, you kind of understand the characters and everything then. Those are actually all the books that I read in October, so let me know whether you've read any of them or what you read in October. I'm very excited to now continue my reading journey into November because there's a lot of sequels to some of the books that I want to read, and just want to get back into my fantasy era. Now that I've read One Dark Window, it's kind of sparked a need to read loads of fantasy. If you want to see what's on my November TBR, then you can watch that video. I think it's coming out after this one, so keep your eyes peeled on my channel for that, and I'm sure I'll see you in the next one super soon. Bye.